Hello watercolor artists, I'm Kelly Hernig, and today we're going to talk about my first watercolor palette. I showed you the Daniel Smith dot cards a couple videos back. I'll have those linked in the description, and this is how I chose my first palette. I was going to France for 14 days and I wanted to make sure that I had a palette that I could capture whatever I wanted to see. And that meant I wanted to capture the architecture. I wanted to capture monuments and gardens, flowers, cafes. I wanted to capture as much as I could about the city. So I was going with a very well-rounded palette is how I looked at it for my first one. And this was in 2017. So I went through the charts and I picked the colors that I thought would work the best for me. That's all I had to go off of because, you know, I was just flying in the dark and I just wanted to do watercolors and take a sketchbook. So I'm going to share my first palette with you. I took a palette. This was the palette that I took, and it just opens up, has a mixing well here and mixing wells here. Now in here are these two colors that I eventually swapped out about a year later, and I'm going to talk to you about that. So you can, I fit 12 colors in here, but you can probably fit, you know, about 5 more in the middle if you wanted to, but 12 was enough for me. That was hard enough to navigate for a first timer for sure. 12 was more than enough, and we'll get to that. So I wanted to share with you my colors. I thought it would be nice to swatch so that you could see kind of how well-rounded it is, and then I'm going to show you the big color swatch that I did for myself. The first color that I went with was Buff Titanium, and that's because I know the architecture of France. It's pretty white. There is a lot of whitish buildings, and remember, it's an old city, so I wanted it to have patina. I wanted it to look dirty, you know, not pristine white. So I thought buff would get me there pretty good. You know, I did a lot of sightseeing on Google and everywhere looking at Paris landscapes and what kind of colors I would need. So that was my first one, Buff. And today, Buff is still on my palette. I'm going to splash that as well. The next color that I picked was Nickel Azo Yellow. Now this color is quite intense, and I thought about it for flowers, and I thought about it for brightening any color that I needed it to. So if I needed a brighter green, or if I needed a brighter blue, brown, this color would definitely brighten up anything. It is a really nice yellow. However, it's a little too bright for me. My palette today does not have anything this intense. And that's just a personal preference. You know, I prefer a more muted palette. But for my first one, yes, I went with something this bold. It's a great color if you do flowers. It has so many good properties with it because it's bright. It's a pretty good middle of the road yellow. It's not too warm, it's not too cold, and it works really good. And then I've got burnt orange. I didn't want to have to mix a lot of colors, so I tried to get colors from every color family on this palette because I wasn't sure how much time I would have to sketch, to paint. So I just tried to get minimal color for every color of the color spectrum. Burnt orange is probably my favorite orange that Daniel Smith makes. I just love its tone. I like that it's kind of muted. It's not a pumpkin orange, but it is a nice fall orange. If you can think about that, think of it as a little more to the rust side instead of like the orange crayon side. Then I had to choose a red. Red was really hard for me because I tend to like brick reds, but I went with perylene red. And this color is a bright, it's more of a pinkish red, I would say. But I knew I could dilute it with a black or a brown and get it to be duller if I needed it, but I didn't know if I would need red, a bright red or not. And I'm glad I had it because there were a lot of flowers blooming. Blue. I'm not a big fan of blues. I can tell you that now. I wanted something that was a little dirtier, not bright, and I picked indanthrone blue. It is still one of my favorite blues. It's not too bright, yet it mixes beautifully with everything. Then I went to browns because browns are very important to me. I like to show dirt and I like to show age and grunge and stains, especially like rust stains. So I knew that I needed several browns and I chose burnt umber for my first brown. And that's because I wanted something a little warmer. I want you to think of a little more orange, a little more on the warmer side. Again, I'm working in a handmade sketchbook with Fabriano cold press paper in it. The next brown is a little more on the brown side. This, I still consider this an orange brown, so I wanted something that would be totally opposite, and I picked raw umber for that. Raw umber I really like. It's a lighter color, and you know what? It's not on my palette now, but I really love the coloration of this color. Do you see the difference in browns? See how that one feels a little warmer with a little more orange to it? Now, I don't really use black in watercolors. I would rather mix a black, meaning I could mix the red, the blue, and a brown and get kind of a nice dark color, or a green and a blue and get a really nice deep color. So what I chose instead was Hematite Genuine. And the reason I chose that color was because it granulates. And I really like granulating colors. And you'll see as it dries, you'll see the little bit of granulation everywhere. And by granulation, you'll see that it has little dots in it when it dries. You can already see how it's kind of got the granulation in there. So I want you to think of spilling salt, like table salt. You know how the granules are left? That's kind of what happens with granulating paint. It soaks down into the texture of the paper. And then there's greens. I knew I wanted a lot of greens, or several greens. So we're going to go to olive green. I usually like a more pea soup kind of green, if that makes sense. I don't like a Kelly green. I like something more in nature. So I'm always looking for something that I can deepen a little. So this I can add brown to. I can add blue to change it to a blue green. I could add that yellow if I needed it to be spring green. I could add red to dull it down. Orange makes a beautiful green, or yeah, orange and this color make a beautiful green. And then I have green apatite. Now green apatite is still on my palette today. I love it because it's a granule. It's another granulating color, but I like the richness of the tone. See how deeper it is? I want you to think of almost a pine or a grass green. I gotta get water on those, got a splash. And then I chose rich gold green, and I did that for two reasons. I thought that it would lighten up the greens really nice, and I thought it would be brighter to add to some of the other colors. If I didn't want this bright yellow, I could use this rich green gold. Again, it's another color like that pea soup green that I like. It's a little on the yellow side. And then I realized I hadn't done a purple. So purple is not my favorite color, and I know I can use red and blue to create more red will create a more red violet, more blue will create a more blue violet. But I was looking for some kind of convenience color. So I thought about Amethyst Genuine. And here's what I didn't know about Amethyst Genuine, is it is really hard to wet from a dried state, which is how my palette is. Remember, I've got them in half pans. I really like the color because it's dirty, and I thought it would go really nice with some of the buildings. Imagine the shadow of this using this, and that's why I picked this color. I picked it because I thought it would be a nice addition to the palette. I thought this and that color would mix really well too, the nickel azo, because this amethyst is going to dull it down because they're across from the color wheel, which means they're complementary colors. But again, it took forever for me to wet. So whenever I went out painting, I really had to just flood this whole half pan with some water so that it could sit there and re-wet itself. You can see how light it is, but you can also see the beautiful color that it has. I really like that color as well. It's a bit of a granulating color as well. And this was my first 12 colors. You can see it's pretty well rounded. I can mix just about anything I want in here, and I was really happy with that. It went with me to France. I ended up filling 3 tiny sketchbooks while I was there, and I thought that was pretty good for my first time sketching on location, traveling, and actually using watercolors. It did everything that I wanted it to do with these colors. And I continued doing urban sketching when I got home. And what I found was this color here was really close to this color. If I mixed these 2 colors, I could get this color. So I looked at it like, you know what, let me find another color. And then this amethyst, although I love the tone of it, I needed to find something that was easier to work with so that I could just dip my brush in the paint and go straight forward. So what I ended up doing was, probably about a year later, I ended up buying Lavender and Sleeping Beauty as the 2 alternatives to this palette. And I'm going to show you those 2. So Sleeping Beauty, what happened was I didn't have a color for water. I have a blue and I have this, but it doesn't really make a nice cobalty teal kind of color. So I thought, well, let me try Sleeping Beauty and see what happens there. And you can see this color. I'm willing to give that color up for this color. That's how I looked at it. I'm willing to sacrifice a green in order to have this ready-made color in my palette that I don't have to work at or be frustrated that I don't have that color. Look how beautiful that is. Sleeping Beauty is more muted than like a cobalt or a cerulean or anything like that. And I really just like the tone of it. And you'll see in my big chart that I'm going to share with you what happens to some of the colors that mixes with it. And then I went with Lavender because it was a more muted color. I mean, look at it in the half pan here. That's this color here. And this is amethyst, so that one looks really dark, but this one looks kind of like a bluish purple. And I thought, you know, I should be able to mix a lot with this, and I'm surprised on how well Lavender fits into my palette. Now, I rarely use it this strength, and what I mostly use Lavender for is mixing colors, or to mute down colors. And when I show you the color chart, you'll understand what I mean by that. It's a gorgeous color, and these 2 are still on my palette today. So these 2 are not, but these 2 are. So I made really good choices for switching those out. While this is drying, I'm going to show you the big color chart using these 12 colors. So remember, I got rid of this quite early, and then I used this. Now this palette here, I used for 2 years. Just as is, I learned how to kind of mix and control colors and get used to seeing what the colors did all together. And that's where this big chart was created here. From those 12 colors, I mixed this chart. And this is what I mean. I can mix every single color that I could think of just about in this color palette. And that's why it served me so well. And I have to say that the only reason that I changed was because I wanted to try some new colors. Otherwise, that palette would still be serving me today. A lot of those same colors are still on my new palette that I'm going to share with you next week. And here's what I want you to see. When I do a color chart, and I did one here on YouTube, I'll share it in the description so you can go check it out. I do each line according to what color is here. So 12 colors, you're going to do 12 this way and 12 that way, and I have them go in the same exact order. But what I do different than a lot of people is I want the line to represent the color that is here. So this is the buff titanium, and so all the way across I wanted it to feel like buff titanium. So I wanted it to feel very muted, very light colored. The next one is nickel azo yellow. So I wanted everything in that row to kind of have a yellow cast. The next one is olive green. So you can see it's a green cast. These are where the browns are. This is where the orange is. Can you see how the tone is a little different? And this is lavender. This is what I said. Look at all the mixes of lavender. Isn't it beautiful, all the different colors you're getting, but yet they're all muted. If you look at buff titanium and lavender as colors that mute everything down, those are how I use it in my palette. I also use Sleeping Beauty a lot to mute colors down too. They mute them in a different way than the lavender. Lavender and buff titanium, I believe, both have white in them, where the Sleeping Beauty is just a muddier toned color. And so it gives you just different kind of mixes. And I really just like that line as well. I'm going to show you these up close so that you can get a little view of the palette. But as you see, everything is there. So I want you to just check out the colors. And you'll notice the last row is my hematite row. And remember I said that that's very granulating. Can you see the bits of black in there? That's the granulating colors. Aren't those just juicy? And again, we end with this buff titanium row, which is the first row there. And you can see the hematite down here is the last row too. It's also got the granulation. So this is where I say in picking a color or picking your first watercolor palette, what do you want to use it for? This served my purpose so well taking it to France, because as you see that it's kind of an urban landscape. So I've got a lot of urban colors here, which is more, to me, urban is more grungier or lived in streets. I want you to think of like aging of the buildings. That's how I look at urban. So I've got these colors. I've got this whole row of buff titanium here. I've also got these colors of lavender as well, which these make great shadow colors, lavender and a lot of the different colors. Hematite is also beautiful because I love the granulation. Then as I explore the gardens, I want you to look at how many different greens are on here. I've got greens here. I've got greens these two rows. I've got greens where the Sleeping Beauty, where the lavender are, a little bit where the hematite is, because when you mix black and yellow, it makes some beautiful greens. And so then I have browns because I'm always enamored by trees and leaves. So I've got really where the orange color, the burnt umber and the burnt orange, and raw umber make some beautiful browns. Look at all these browns in here that I can play with trees and just adjust their color how I need them to be. I can add more blue, I can add more green, and I can add yellows, and it changes the colors. I've got fall leaves. Look at the fall colors in here. I've got a nice richness there. I can make flowers of all colors. I've got bright yellow. I've got some bright oranges. I've got a bright red. I've got a violet, I've got some whites, I've got a pink. So everything is kind of covered. And when I was thinking about what I wanted my palette to do for me, that is what I was coming up with is, well, I know I'm going to see the gardens and the fountains and that kind of thing. And I love statues. I wanted to do the river. I wanted to do river boats. So all of those led me to picking a palette that I felt would fit my needs. So let me come back with my palette now and show you the colors. I'm going to bring you up for a close-up now. So there's buff titanium, nickel azo yellow, quinacridone burnt orange, perylene red, indanthrone blue, burnt umber, raw umber, hematite genuine, look at that granulation, olive green, and then green apatite genuine. You can also see some granulation in there. Rich green gold and amethyst genuine, and then Sleeping Beauty and Lavender. I hope my first watercolor palette inspires you to create one of your own. If you enjoyed this video, please like, comment, or subscribe. I would really appreciate it. Thanks for watching.